At 9:34 on the morning of April 18, 1943, Major John W. Mitchell looked across a thin haze over Bougainville and saw the impossible: 2 Japanese G-4M Betty bombers, 6 Zero fighters, and a schedule running almost to the minute. His 16 P-38 Lightnings had flown from Guadalcanal at wave-top height for more than 2 hours. The target was not a bridge. It was not a runway. It was one man in the lead bomber, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. What Mitchell's pilots did not know was that their mission rested on a secret more valuable than any airplane in the South Pacific. For days earlier, on April 14, American radio intercept stations had copied a Japanese naval message and sent it to Fleet Radio Unit Pacific at Pearl Harbor. The message contained Yamamoto's route, times, and landing field. If Japan guessed how the Americans knew, the entire code-breaking war could go dark. 3 mysteries followed the smoke into the jungle that morning. Why did Admiral Chester Nimitz approve a mission that looked, even then, like targeted killing? Which American pilot actually destroyed Yamamoto's bomber, Thomas Lanphier or Rex Barber? And why did Japan hide the Admiral's death from its own public until May 21, more than a month after his body was found still strapped near the wreckage? Isoroku Yamamoto was born in Nagaoka, Japan, on April 4, 1884, the son of a former samurai family with more pedigree than money. In 1905, at the Battle of Tsushima, Russian shell fragments tore into him and cost him 2 fingers on his left hand. He graduated into a navy that worshipped decisive battle, but his years in the United States taught him something Tokyo did not want to hear. Yamamoto studied at Harvard from 1919 to 1921, later served as naval attaché in Washington, and learned American oil, factories, railroads, and shipyards by sight. When Japanese planners claimed they could fight the United States for 18 months, Yamamoto answered, "It is the same as my own studies." The line mattered because he still planned Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, Franklin Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. Pearl Harbor made Yamamoto infamous in the United States, but Midway made him vulnerable in Japan. Between June 4 and June 7, 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy lost 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. The victory did not end the Pacific War. It did something more dangerous. It told American commanders that Japanese operational habits, when paired with broken codes, could be anticipated. By February 1943, Guadalcanal had been abandoned by Japanese forces after 6 months of disease, shellfire, and failed reinforcement runs through Iron Bottom Sound. Yamamoto needed to restore confidence across the Solomons. Operation Igo began on April 7, sending Japanese naval aircraft against Allied shipping and airfields. The report sent back to Rabaul exaggerated American losses. The admiral believed his frontline airmen deserved inspection, praise, and pressure. Rabaul, on New Britain, was the hub of that fragile Japanese air empire. Its harbor held repair ships, barges, anti-aircraft guns, and men who knew Henderson Field was no longer a temporary American foothold. Yamamoto planned to fly from Rabaul toward Bougainville Island, near Bougainville, on April 18. He would congratulate crews, inspect bases, and return with the punctuality that had become one of his signatures. That habit became a targeting aid. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff, would fly in the second Betty. Ugaki was not a passenger with a ceremonial role. He had watched the combined fleet strain after Midway, had recorded daily war details in his diary, and understood that Guadalcanal had exposed Japan's logistical weakness. On the morning of April 18, he was close enough to see the first bomber die. But he would live with what he saw. At Pearl Harbor, the decoded itinerary moved through a narrow circle. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, known as FROPAC, worked Japanese naval traffic under extreme secrecy. Admiral Edwin Layton, Nimitz's intelligence officer, had known Yamamoto before the war and understood his value. The message did not say the admiral might travel. It gave times, stops, and aircraft movement. In intelligence work, that was not rumor. It was a window. The intercepted message listed Yamamoto's April 18 inspection route with a precision that made staff officers uneasy. It named Rabaul, Bougainville, and nearby forward areas around Bougainville. It gave a landing time around 9:45 in local Solomon Islands time, after conversion from Japanese scheduling. Major Mitchell would later calculate that the interception had to happen roughly 10 minutes before landing, while the bombers descended and before anti-aircraft guns near Bougainville could join the fight. The decision climbed the chain of command fast. Admiral Nimitz discussed the chance with senior officers, and Admiral William Halsey's South Pacific Command had to execute it. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox may have known, but surviving records do not settle every Washington detail. That uncertainty became part of the story. Was this a normal attack on an enemy commander in uniform or something closer to assassination by decrypted appointment? The aircraft problem was brutal. Navy F-4F Wildcats and Marine F-4U Corsairs could fight over the Solomons, but they could not make the long over-water interception and return with margin. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning could. It carried twin Allison engines, a 20mm cannon, and 4.50 caliber machine guns in the nose. With external tanks, it could cross the empty water west of Guadalcanal and still have enough fuel to fight. Major John W. Mitchell, commander of the 339th Fighter Squadron, was 28 years old and already trusted for calm navigation. He rejected one proposed route as too exposed, then drew a dogleg path over open ocean to avoid Japanese coast watchers and radar. The math left almost no forgiveness. A few minutes late, Yamamoto would be on the ground. A few minutes early, the P-38s would circle and reveal themselves. The strike group was divided with care. 4 P-38s formed the killer flight: Captain Thomas G. Lanphier Jr., Lieutenant Rex T. Barber, Lieutenant Besby F. Holmes, and Lieutenant Raymond K. Hine. The rest would provide cover against the 6-0 escorts expected above the bombers. Mitchell led the broader formation. The pilots were told a cover story about Australian coast watchers. They were not told that JN-25 had betrayed the Admiral. On April 17, ground crews at Cookham Field wrestled with fuel tanks, fittings, and last-minute modifications. Each P-38 needed extra fuel, and every extra pound made takeoff longer on a hot coral strip. The pilots carried maps, stopwatches, and a mission plan that depended on silence. There would be no radio chatter to correct mistakes over the ocean. Dead reckoning, compass headings, and Mitchell's timing would have to do the work. At 7:25 on April 18, the P-38s began lifting from Cookham Field. Some accounts described the Lightnings using nearly the full runway under the weight of fuel. The first anniversary of the Doolittle raid passed almost unnoticed beneath their wheels. This mission had no carrier deck, no Tokyo skyline, and no chance of a public announcement if it worked. The valuable part of the victory had to remain hidden. The cover story mattered because one careless sentence could cost future battles. If Japanese commanders believed local observers had reported Yamamoto's flight, they might blame bad luck. If they suspected codebreaking, they could change systems, procedures, or call signs. At Midway, intelligence had helped locate Japanese carriers. In April 1943, Nimitz had to decide whether killing Yamamoto was worth putting that invisible advantage at risk. The answer was yes. In Rabaul, local commanders reportedly worried about an ambush, but Yamamoto kept the schedule. The Admiral was famous for punctuality, and on April 18 that trait became more dangerous than any escort fighter. His lead Mitsubishi G4M Betty took off around 8:10 local Solomon time, with another Betty carrying Ugaki and staff officers. 6 A6M0s formed escort. The flight to Bougainville was roughly 315 miles. It should have been routine. The Japanese bombers climbed to about 6,500 feet, with the Zero escorts positioned higher and behind them. The Betty had range, but its design carried a fatal bargain: large fuel capacity, light construction, limited protection, and no self-sealing tanks. Allied airmen had nicknames for aircraft that burned easily. On this morning, the technical weakness of a bomber met the concentrated nose guns of a P-38 at exactly the planned point. For more than 2 hours, the American fighters flew low over water, often described as near wave-top height, engines droning under radio silence. The route bent away from direct lines to avoid Japanese eyes. Mitchell fought the clock and the map. The ocean offered no road signs, only glare, cloud, and fuel needles. At 9:34, his formation arrived 1 minute early. Ahead, Yamamoto's aircraft descended through light haze. The sighting happened fast. The Americans jettisoned external tanks and climbed. The Japanese formation reacted as the Zero escorts dove. Then one critical problem struck the killer flight: Besby Holmes could not release his drop tanks. His P-38, still burdened, could not maneuver properly. Hind stayed with him. That left Lanphier and Barber pressing toward the bombers while Mitchell's top-cover pilots tangled with the escorts. The perfect plan had already changed. Lanphier later described turning into the Zeros, while Barber pursued the bombers as they dropped toward the jungle. The accounts diverged almost immediately and would never fully reunite. What witnesses did agree on was that the lead Betty began trailing smoke and lost control near the Bougainville canopy. In the second bomber, Matome Ugaki saw the commander-in-chief's aircraft falling. He later remembered the moment in only a few words: "My God." Ugaki grabbed Air Staff Officer Midway and pointed toward the lead bomber. His second remembered sentence was just as short: "Look at the commander-in-chief's plane." Within roughly 20 seconds, the aircraft carrying Yamamoto vanished into black smoke above the trees. The phrase matters because it came from the man Japan needed alive to explain what had happened. Instead, Ugaki became a witness inside the next target. The second Betty, carrying Ugaki, was also hit. It went down into the sea near the coast, tearing open with enough violence that Ugaki blacked out and later found himself floating. Ugaki and 3 other men from that aircraft survived. Yamamoto's lead bomber, often identified with tail number 323, did not. All aboard were killed, including the admiral, a medical officer, and staff. In the air, the Americans still had to escape the Zeros and find Guadalcanal with fuel running down. Lieutenant Raymond K. Hind did not come back. Holmes survived the mission, but Hind disappeared during the fight and was never recovered. That loss is often buried under the argument over who killed Yamamoto, yet it was the only American death in the operation. Near Henderson Field, Lanphier broke radio discipline with the reported line, "That son of a bitch will not be dictating any peace terms in the White House." Security had nearly cracked. On April 19, a Japanese search party entered the Bougainville jungle and found the wreck. Yamamoto's body was discovered near the aircraft, still associated in accounts with his seat and sword. Medical examination found bullet wounds in his shoulder and jaw, and concluded he had died before the crash. The details were too damaging for immediate public release. Japan had not just lost an admiral. It had lost the symbol of Pearl Harbor. Tokyo did not announce Yamamoto's death until May 21, 1943. His state funeral followed on June 5. Part of his ashes were placed at Tama Cemetery in Tokyo, and part returned to his ancestral home in Nagaoka. The delay created a strange silence across Japan's command structure. Men knew something catastrophic had happened, but the public mourning had to wait until the government could shape the loss into ritual instead of shock. The American pilots landed with fuel margins that left little room for celebration. Every participating pilot received the Navy Cross, an extraordinary award for an operation that officially had to be explained without revealing the real intelligence source. The medal citations recognized a dangerous long-range mission, but the deeper story remained classified. The men had flown one of the longest fighter intercepts of the war and then had to watch the truth disappear into paperwork. Almost immediately, the kill credit became unstable. Lanphier claimed he had shot down Yamamoto's bomber after engaging the escorts. Barber insisted his guns had destroyed the lead Betty from behind. Japanese accounts complicated Lanphier's version because they did not record a Zero loss in the way he described. The wreckage pattern, later testimony, and pilot memories all became evidence in a case that lasted longer than the Pacific War itself. Rex Barber had returned with severe battle damage, including accounts of more than 100 holes in his P-38. He was 25 years old, from Oregon, and had no way to know that a few seconds over Bougainville would follow him for the rest of his life. Thomas Lanphier, 27, had a forceful personality and wrote reports that shaped early understanding. 2 pilots came home. 1 bomber fell. The record split. The Japanese side had its own witnesses. Surviving Zero pilot Kenji Yanagiya later became important to historians trying to reconstruct the fight from angles the Americans could not see. Ugaki's survival mattered too, because his aircraft had gone into the water while Yamamoto's crashed in the jungle. The two crash sites created two different bodies of evidence. One held wreckage and remains. The other held memory, seawater, and trauma. Ugaki's path after April 18 became one of the darker footnotes. In October 1944, he was present during the battles around Leyte Gulf, when Japan's navy tried to strike American invasion forces. On August 15, 1945, after Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast, Ugaki took off on what is often described as a final kamikaze mission and did not return. The man who watched Yamamoto die chose the sky at the end. The code-breaking secret held. The full public story of the mission and its intelligence basis did not emerge during the war. That restraint mattered because Japanese naval communications still fed Allied planning in 1943 and 1944. Operation Vengeance was therefore both a tactical success and a security gamble. It killed a commander, protected a secret, and left enough false explanations behind that even some American participants misunderstood what they had been allowed to know. The Coastwatcher cover story did what it was meant to do, but it also blurred memory after April 1943. Pilots who thought local observers had reported the route could talk about daring without understanding the cryptologic risk beneath it. FRUPAC intelligence officers had a different burden. They knew that one decrypted timetable had been converted into a death sentence for a specific officer. The same act could look like ordinary war from a cockpit and something colder from a code room. Japan replaced Yamamoto with Admiral Manichi Koga in 1943, but continuity did not mean recovery. Koga inherited a navy losing pilots, fuel, carriers, and initiative across the Central and South Pacific. In March 1944, Koga himself died when his aircraft vanished in bad weather near the Philippines. Japan's high command kept losing men and plans to the air. Yamamoto's death was not the cause of defeat, but it removed a rare strategic mind. 6 weeks after Yamamoto's death, American pressure in the Solomons continued to build toward New Georgia and the long grind up the island chain. The practical effect was not one dramatic collapse. It was erosion. Japanese aircrews had lost their senior naval symbol after Guadalcanal, and Allied commanders had proven they could reach into a schedule and remove a man. That psychological fact traveled faster than any official communiqué. The legal argument did not vanish after 1943. Yamamoto was an enemy commander in uniform, flying in a military aircraft, through an active theater of war. Yet the mission was designed around killing him personally, not merely attacking any plane that appeared. Modern debates about targeted killing often return to this case because it sits uncomfortably between battlefield interception and assassination. The facts are clean. The moral category is not. The secrecy also shaped journalism. Unauthorized hints and pilot-centered versions circulated before the full code-breaking background could be acknowledged. By September 1945, after Japan surrendered, newspapers could finally discuss the Broken Message Foundation more openly. That delay gave early narratives time to harden. Lanphier's claim, Barber's claim, and the official desire for closure all entered the public record before historians could test them against Japanese testimony and wreckage analysis. In 1978, when official Air Force aerial victory records were published, Lanphier and Barber still shared credit. Barber kept fighting. In 1991, an Air Force History Office advisory opinion said, "Enough uncertainty exists to accept both claims." In 1996, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the denial of Barber's petition for sole credit. The bureaucracy had chosen ambiguity, even as many later historians leaned toward Barber. The crash site near Bin on Bougainville remained a physical answer that no memo could fully settle after April 19, 1943. The tail section and jungle wreckage became a destination for researchers and locals, a relic of one morning when radio intelligence, navigation, and chance met above the trees. Metal corrodes differently than memory. It does not care about medals, reputations, or official compromise. It only records angles, impacts, and fire. In Japan, Yamamoto became both a lost commander and a symbol shaped by post-war memory. His ashes at Tama Cemetery in Nagaoka linked him to national mourning and hometown identity. Yet the harder truth stayed, he understood America's industrial power better than many of the men who pushed Japan toward war, and he still helped launch the attack that made compromise impossible. The man who doubted the war became one of its central authors. Major John Mitchell lived with a different kind of legacy after April 18, 1943. He had not fired the famous shots, but his navigation made the mission possible. A 1-minute error could have meant empty sky, wasted fuel, and a compromised secret. Mitchell's name is less familiar than Yamamoto, Lanphier, or Barber, yet the operation was fundamentally his calculation: distance, time, fuel, altitude, and silence joined into a single interception point. Rex Barber died in Oregon on July 26, 2001, still associated with a claim he never saw fully accepted by the government. Thomas Lanphier had died in 1987, before the 1991 review that kept the shared credit intact. The fight became personal because the event was personal. To a historian, it was a problem of evidence. To a pilot, it was the defining burst of gunfire in a life. There is another missing man in the legacy, Raymond K. Hine. His name appears as the American pilot who did not return, but he is rarely the center of the story. Operation Vengeance is usually told through Yamamoto's death or the Barber-Lanphier argument. Hine reminds us that even a perfectly timed mission leaves someone outside the clean ending. His aircraft vanished into the same morning that made other men famous. The operation worked because many systems overlapped: Japanese punctuality, American codebreaking, P-38 range, Mitchell's navigation, and the Betty bomber's vulnerability. Remove one piece and April 18 looks different. That is why the story still feels modern. It is not only about pilots in leather helmets. It is about what happens when surveillance, timing, and military power identify one individual with lethal precision in a world already at war. So here is the question Operation Vengeance leaves behind. In 1943, Nimitz's staff answered under wartime pressure, with JN-25 still secret and the Solomons still burning. If killing one commander can save lives, damage an enemy, and shorten a campaign, but doing it risks exposing the intelligence source that protects thousands more, where should the line be drawn? At the cockpit, at the code room, or at the desk of the admiral who signs the order?